Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Academy Insider podcast. I want to give a fair warning off the bat that today's episode is going to discuss some very heavy topics, including suicide. I'm joined by Tonia Lott. Tonia's son, Julian, was a Naval Academy graduate and a submarine officer. Julian died by suicide. In today's episode, we're going to discuss Tonia's creation of a company called Healing Out Loud, as well as the writing of her book, My Beautiful Black Son, Died by Suicide. We are also going to discuss the resources that exist at the United States Naval Academy for midshipmen who may be struggling with mental health, with any kind of health, or just any thoughts that they may be having. Because at the end of the day, we just want to see our midshipmen and our service members healthy and happy, filled with purpose and doing their job. I hope you enjoyed the listen. I know this can be a very sensitive topic, so please feel free to stop at any time. But I just want to highlight that this is an important topic that we need to talk about, which is what Tonia will touch on in this episode as well as highlight the resources that are out there for midshipmen who may be struggling. Have a good listen. Thank you very much, and have a good day. The Academy Insider podcast is sponsored by the Vermeer Group, a residential real estate company that serves the United States Naval Academy community and other select clientele in both California and Texas. If I can ever answer a real estate related question for you or connect you with a trusted Academy affiliated agent in the market which you're in, please reach out to me directly at grant@thevermeergroup.com. You can also reach out to me on my LinkedIn page, Grant Vermeer, and I'd be happy to respond to you there. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Academy Insider podcast. Tonia, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come talk to us about this topic. And if you don't mind just giving a quick introduction and background about yourself and your relation to the Naval Academy for our audience.
Well, thank you so much, Grant, for having me. My name is Tonia Lott, and I am connected to the Naval Academy because my son, Julian Brown III, is a graduate of the Naval Academy in 2019.
Yeah.
And I could not have been more proud of Julian. When he graduated, he immediately went off to Submarine Nuclear Engineering School in Charleston, South Carolina, and he graduated in the top, I believe, 5% of his class, which was really, I was proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mandatory for that top percentage to go to Norfolk, Virginia.
Yep.
And we live in Baltimore, Maryland. So Norfolk, Virginia did not sound very exciting for him. So he wasn't necessarily excited about being so close to home. He wanted to really experience going away.
Sure.
But I thought it was great because he would be closer to me. But yeah, he was quickly promoted. He got the title of Officer 3,
Mm-hmm.
level 3.
Yep.
And he actually was a supervisor over a crew of a recently commissioned sub,
Mm-hmm.
SSN 796.
Yep.
So, very, very proud of Julian and thought he was achieving wonderful things. And he was always just really popular, had a lot of friends. And I found out on August 15th, 2023, that I lost him to suicide without ever knowing he was depressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very difficult topic, and I just appreciate you again being willing to do this. And part of this is in your overall mission, which you've articulated to heal out loud, right, and to share your story in a therapeutic way, but also to help give back, especially in this community where there are a lot of really high performing individuals, right? And this is going to be a conversation that you wrote about in your book, but today as well is our role as family and support and just signs to look at when someone is extremely high performing and they have a lot of friends, and there's a lot of things that can be extremely difficult in that. And I do just want to ask before we even jump into some of the topics of today is, again, for anyone who hasn't seen the book, again, I have it right here and I encourage you to check it out. My Beautiful Black Son, Died by Suicide. Do you mind what sharing that led you to actually write the book, right? On this pathway of healing, what led you to actually write this book?
So initially, I was just so confused. Again, not even knowing he was depressed.
Mhm.
This was extremely shocking.
Sure.
Not that any parent can ever be like, oh, okay, I knew my child was depressed. It's fine. But there
Mhm.
is another layer when you think your child is extremely happy
Sure.
and the joy of everyone's life, to lose them in this way, it is a shock to your entire system.
Mhm.
So I started to journal for selfish reasons, trying to figure out how I missed this and trying to reconcile, was I a bad mom because I missed this?
Mhm.
So my journaling were just trying to figure things out. I went through old text messages
Mhm.
with Julian, just again trying to figure out how I missed this. And I received a message one day. I woke up and said, "You need to write a book,"
Mhm.
because there are a lot of there's a lot of stigma surrounding depression,
Sure.
mental health, and definitely suicide.
Mhm.
And I fell into that stigma. Me thinking a person that's happy or seemingly happy,
Mhm.
joking, popular, successful,
Yep.
me thinking that that means they can't suffer from depression is a stigma. It's ignorance and not understanding that someone that is achieving things
Mhm.
and is good at certain things and is always popular and is funny
Yeah.
does not mean they are struggling and just not sharing it with
Yep.
others.
100%. And in speaking of that sharing, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Julian growing up? Was there ever kind of a lack of sharing? Or I think you wrote in that book that you guys' relationship was extremely close and he told you everything. Is that correct? And do you mind explaining just a little bit of your relationship with Julian as he was growing up as a child?
Yeah, so Julian and I were extremely close. I've always been open as a mom with my kids and talked about all the things that I thought were important.
Hmm.
Again, we, I myself and Julian as well, born and raised in Baltimore City. So, as a Black mom of a Black son, one of my biggest concerns for him was always the street violence and making sure that he was
Yeah.
safe. So the things that we talked about were things that I deemed important. We talked about keeping a
Hmm.
cool head and not getting into fights. We talked about the
Hmm.
importance of understanding how to be compliant if you're pulled over by a police officer. We talked about his credit
Hmm.
score. We talked about safe sex. We talked about all the things that I thought were extremely important. And Julian was pretty open. Almost he almost overshared when I talked to him. So when I thought it
Sure.
was time to have the sex talk, he was like, "Oh yeah, I bought condoms already. I'm good." So
You're like, whoa.
I was like, "What? What do you mean? You're 13 years old." So he definitely would talk when I opened that door. And I do
Sure.
regret that I never, even when he went through traumatic situations, I never said, "Wow, Julian, this seems really heavy. Have you thought about talking to a therapist?" I regret
Sure.
asking him, "Have you ever thought about hurting yourself? Or, have you ever been so sad that you've thought about that?" I think these are things as parents that we need to be more open about. Just like I wasn't afraid to talk about sex, I didn't think that meant he was going to go out and have sex just because we talked
Mhm.
about it. I also think that as parents, we need to ask our young adults, because again, at the Naval Academy, and at the time that I lost Julian, he was 25 years old. So he
Mhm.
wasn't a little kid anymore. He's a young adult, but I am still his parent. And I do regret
Yeah.
never asking him how was his mental state? How was he really feeling? And what was he really thinking?
You mentioned kind of not checking in on his potentially on his mental state. Were you able to experience or see anything in a shift during plebe summer or during the Naval Academy, or how was his overall demeanor while he was a midshipman at the Naval Academy?
So, good question. I definitely remember plebe summer. His letters, he would say, "Oh, it's hard," but then he would immediately say, but overall, it's so easy. He would mention one thing that was hard. I just looked through all of our letters, which I was
Mhm.
so grateful that I saved all of them. But
Sure.
he mentioned trying to memorize everything was so hard and so stupid. Like he felt it was dumb. But then he
Yeah.
follows up and says, "But everything else, I'm killing it and
Mhm.
tell everyone it's as easy as I thought it would be." So he would say something he struggles with, but then kind of makes a joke about overall everything. And I
Mhm.
think that that was his way of masking that he really may have been struggling. I
Sure.
also remember when he came home, because it was towards the end of plebe summer when he was able to come home for, wasn't even a weekend. He just came home for a family dinner and then he had to
Mhm.
go back. His dad took him back. I didn't ride with them. And his dad shared with me that he cried on his way back and said
Mhm.
he really just wanted to stay home. He didn't want to
Yeah.
go back. That it was really tough. So he
Mhm.
did share that with his dad. Looking back on it, Julian did not 100% just openly share with me when he was really struggling.
Sure.
He shared with other people. Like I didn't even know Julian was stressed. I did
Mhm.
notice that he started to kind of distance himself and he seemed busier than usual. And
Yeah.
I did ask him, I said, "Julian, what's going on? It doesn't seem like you're replying to my text and like you usually do." And he said,
Mhm.
"Mom, I'm just so busy." And I thought that was, you know, a reasonable answer. He's working
Mhm.
on a submarine where he can't necessarily answer text messages.
Yeah.
Sometimes he was working really long days. So I was just like, "Oh, yeah, he's busy. Makes sense."
Mhm.
And didn't question it anymore. Where I
Sure.
wish I would have said, "Are you sure you're just busy? Or are you going through something? Are you struggling? Are you
Mhm.
stressed?" I wish I would have peeled back the onion just a little bit more and not just assumed that, "Oh, well, he's 25 years old, he's grown. He doesn't
Mhm.
need his mommy checking up on him." I wish mommy would have done a little more checking in.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. It's near impossible to be in that spot for you and as a parent because he is busy, right? He is extremely busy and life on a submarine is it's almost never ending, right? Like it's just it's constant. And so I think it's extremely difficult because you don't want to be overbearing and these tough situations. And then on top of that, there's another factor kind of mixed into it, which I do want to talk about because it's something you mentioned a lot in your book, is this idea of the mask of success, right? Because at the end of the day, Julian, he was great academically. He was top of his class at the nuclear power school. He had purchased 2 homes at his different duty stations, like, not only in a work sense, but in a life sense, he had all things seemingly very successful. And so, from that perspective, how did you again, how do you start to realize it and retrospectively think back on this again, this mask of success and not taking everything at just the face value of what it looks like?
Yeah, so hindsight for me, it still isn't 2020.
Mhm.
There are still some things where I'm like, I just don't understand that.
Yeah.
However, there were signs, right?
Mhm.
The last time we FaceTimed, his girlfriend had the phone while he was driving,
Mhm.
and Julian did not look at me.
Mhm.
He never leaned over and said, "Hey, mom." I heard him speaking,
Mhm.
but he never looked at me. That was a sign. And I remember feeling I didn't even see his face.
Mhm.
And I kind of brushed it off like, well, he's driving, but he wasn't that safe of a driver. He could have leaned over to say hello.
Sure.
That was a sign.
Mhm.
I also remember thinking it was strange that he and his girlfriend were, I FaceTimed him, which I normally don't just FaceTime
Mhm.
without texting first.
Yeah.
But we were at my mom's, we were telling a funny story, and I wanted to FaceTime him to see if he would pick up, and he did. And I find out he's in Atlanta with his girlfriend going to a Beyonce concert. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, what? You didn't tell me and my husband to come join you? He knows I love Beyonce,
Mhm.
and I would have gone to Atlanta. We could have gone to the concert together.
Mhm.
I remember thinking, that's weird. Not just that he didn't ask me, just that I didn't know.
Sure.
Like, that wasn't like Julian.
Mhm.
We shared like everything, especially exciting things. Like, guess what? I'm going to Atlanta to see Beyonce.
Mhm.
Like, that's so I just remember thinking, wow, he's really growing up. Like, he's not even telling me when he does stuff. But that wasn't it.
Mhm.
This was the weekend I lost him on August 15th, which was a Tuesday.
Mhm.
This was the Saturday before the Tuesday.
Mhm.
He was trying his best to have a good time with his girlfriend, but he could not face me.
Mhm.
I think he was struggling that bad where he couldn't face me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then the last time he came home, which was in July 7th,
Mhm.
for my granddaughter's birthday party, I remember him always when he came home, he would go out with his friends. And for whatever reason, he was just so tired. He took a nap.
Mhm.
And when he woke up, I said, "So you're going to go hang out?" And he said, "No, I'm just going to go back home." And I was like, "What?"
Mhm.
But I just remember thinking, oh, because he surprised us when he came home. It's
Sure.
almost a 4-hour drive. Maybe he's just tired. Maybe he works so hard. Like but those were signs. He wasn't just tired. His personality had changed a little.
Mhm.
The text messages were fewer and far in between.
Mhm.
His connection to me was off. His connection to his friends, not wanting to visit his friends, was off.
Mhm.
So there were some signs. He had shared with everyone else but me that
Mhm.
he was so stressed. He was very stressed. He just told me he was busy. He never shared he was stressed.
Yeah.
But if all of us as a family would have sat down to say, "Hey, what has Julian shared with you?" it would have come out that he expressed how stressed he was.
Mhm.
He was very short-tempered, more than usual,
Mhm.
even with his dogs.
Mhm.
He had lost his temper with one of his dogs. That was not Julian. He
Mhm.
was really struggling.
Yeah. And how do you navigate the after of this situation? Again, you mentioned multiple times that these things and now in telling these stories and journaling and writing a book have been a source of like processing what happened. How have you processed this grief and how do you continue to heal through this process?
That's a good question, Grant, because I'm very new in
Mhm.
my grief journey. It was a year in August. I have come up with the term and actually started a company
Mhm.
called Healing Out Loud.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is because I'm trying so hard to break the stigma surrounding mental health, depression, and suicide. And in doing so, it's helping me heal because I recognize now that even with all the information in the world,
Mhm.
I still may not have been able to stop this.
Sure.
I do believe that having more information, having more understanding would have been helpful and could have stopped it. But I try not to do the woulda, coulda, shouldas because I did the best that I could
Mhm.
with the information and the knowledge that I had. So
Mhm.
I have really try to I'm turning my pain from losing the most amazing son I could have ever asked for. I mean,
Yeah.
truly Julian was a joy. Some people, they love their kids, but they don't really like their kids. I really like my
Yeah.
kids, and I really enjoyed everything about Julian. Good,
Mhm.
bad, ugly, whatever you want to call it. The only thing I would have changed is how I lost them, right?
Sure.
So I'm healing out loud in hopes of sharing my story. Because if I
Mhm.
fell into the stigma that, oh, of course he's not depressed, suicide's not even on the table for us to discuss because look at all his accomplishments. I know that if I fell into that stigma, other parents and other people fall into that stigma as well, and not knowing that you have to check in on mental health even if you don't think your person is depressed.
Sure.
It's still something to check in on. So my healing out loud journey is hoping that I can help people understand how important it is to check on our loved ones'
Mhm.
mental, regardless if we think they're depressed or not.
Yeah. And in your learning and discovery of this process, what does that look like? Like, what questions should be asking? Is it as simple as just quite literally asking a direct question like, "How is your mental state?" Or what things, in retrospect and conversations you've been having with, your folks in the corner with you kind of going through this process, what questions, like, were you wishing that maybe you would have asked in those moments?
Yeah, so I did a panel discussion at a women's summit on Julian's
Mhm,
birthday. He would have been
mhm,
27 on October 22nd. And during that panel discussion, did a Q&A at the end. And there was a lady in the audience who said her dad was a psychiatrist. And it was normal practice growing up in her home for her dad
mhm,
to say, "Well, you're not thinking about hurting yourself, are you?" Whenever they discussed problems that they were
mhm.
having as kids. She said it was just normal. And
Sure.
I think that it needs to be normalized to ask the people that we love if we see if they're in a stressful environment, which the
Mhm.
Navy, it can be
It
very
is.
stressful. I
Mhm,
think it's important to say, are you sure that you're just busy, or is there something deeper going on? Are you really stressed? If they say yes, I am terribly stressed. I think it is so important to just follow up and say, you're not thinking about hurting yourself, are you?
mhm.
Or have you thought about hurting yourself? Actually, the latter. Have you thought
Sure.
about hurting yourself? Don't say, you're not thinking about hurting yourself, are you? Because that kind of implies
But
that they shouldn't be
challenging, yeah,
thinking that. You
sure.
just want to just ask, have you ever
Mhm,
thought about hurting yourself? Are you so stressed that you thought that you just can't go on anymore?
mhm,
Ask the question.
yeah,
And most
and
people that are in that much pain can't lie
mhm,
about it.
sure, sure. No, that makes sense, and from your perspective, again, I think this is, I just I feel so sorry for you, as again, you've mentioned a couple times, like, it was tough because you put your pride and identity in being a mother and being there for him, and you wish you could have changed these things, and you even asked yourself the question like, did I miss something? Is it my fault? And somehow, how have you gone on your journey of silencing that inner critic and just kind of loving and taking care of yourself after and through this process as well?
Yeah. So you really read that book, huh? Thank you,
I read
Grant.
it. I read it. No, through and through, through and through.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I've always considered myself a pretty confident person, but I learned that most of my confidence was based off of my kids' success, which
Sure.
is not true confidence and it's not true happiness to base your happiness based off of your child doing well in life. Because
Sure.
once this happened, because that was my entire identity, I felt like I wanted to die. How could I go on living when my son was this unhappy for the result to be his death? So I really had to pull myself out of a really dark, dark era in understanding that I am still a good mom. In spite
Mhm.
of this, Julian was still an amazing person. The
Yeah.
fact that he lost his battle and it ended in suicide does not define the man that he was, does not define the mother that I still am. I
Mhm.
also realized that we only feel about things based off of the stories we tell ourselves. And
Sure.
there was a point that I was telling myself, well, obviously you were a horrible mom because you missed this. Well, I started to realize that my brain was doing the worst case scenario, saying, yes, you were a bad mom because you missed this. I started going through text messages and seeing Julian tell me, Mom, thank you so much. I can always depend on you if he asked a question or needed something. So I was like, this doesn't sound like a bad mom. It sounds like I was a pretty good mom. It sounds like my son knew he could depend on me, but for whatever reason, he didn't want this burden for me. He felt like he
Mhm.
could handle it. So I started telling my stories, telling myself a different story. Rather than going to the worst case scenario, I started painting a more positive picture
Yeah.
because I don't know the 100% truth. So rather than going to the worst case scenario, I just started telling myself the best case scenario to give myself the will to live to survive this
Yeah.
unimaginable loss. And then I
Mhm.
also felt like it was my duty to try to make sure that other parents don't suffer this same type of loss.
Absolutely. And you've kind of dubbed that as this idea of healing through awareness. And you told stories again about the concert in Atlanta with Beyonce and some of these other factors. What are these signs, more or less, that again grown to learn and seen in retrospect, that parents should be looking out for, whether direct or indirect? You kind of gave examples of how it directly related to Julian, but how would you kind of more broadly describe some of these things that they should be paying attention to as best they can as they're figuring this stuff out?
Yeah. Definitely pay attention to change behavior. If you feel like your child is automatically replies to a text, if they just start saying okay, if you send them a text and you notice they don't even like it,
Mhm.
or if they only like it and don't say anything and they usually say something, those are
Mhm.
changes in behavior, especially these days and times. Younger people, that texting is a lifeline. So
Mhm.
if the communication changes through that lifeline, that is a
Mhm.
huge sign. And you should dig deep to find out
Mhm.
why that changed. And don't take I'm busy as the an answer.
Sure.
Ask more questions to
Mhm.
determine if it really because they're busy, or if it's because something else more, if they have more burdens that are going on that they're
Mhm.
not sharing at that moment.
No,
And
absolutely.
we also
Oh,
have to
please.
remember as parents, sorry, I just thought of one other thing. We
Mhm.
also have to remember as parents that a lot of times when we're like, oh, I'm so proud of you, I'm so proud of you, I'm so proud of you, that is an extra layer of pressure that we're putting on our high performing kids because they don't
Mm.
want us to feel if they have a mental struggle that we wouldn't be proud of them. So it's
Mhm.
extremely important to understand when we're telling our kids how proud we are of them, that we
Mm,
also are a safe space to let them know mentally, if it's ever too much, all these things that we're proud of with your
mhm,
accomplishments at the Naval Academy or whatever they decide to do after the Naval Academy, whatever they're doing, we need to let them know, if it's too much, you need to let me know. If mentally
mhm,
you can't handle this, it's okay. We're going to
mhm.
figure out your next steps. It will be okay. I wish
Yep.
I would have shared that with Julian,
Mhm.
because it's
No.
very clear that in any branch of the services, if you're having severe mental issues and you say you have thoughts of suicide, you're going to be discharged. And
Yeah.
that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. Mhm. No, 100%. And again, just in specific relation to the Naval Academy, I'll kind of again jump in. If you're a parent and you're worried in any little way, again, there are so many resources, and you're not sure how you would handle a conversation like this as well. You can always just encourage as well your son or daughter to pursue some of the resources that exist on the Naval Academy campus because they are extensive. Every single battalion on the yard inside of Bancroft Hall has a chaplain assigned to them who have this grief counseling and counseling training behind them as well. There's the Midshipman Development Center, which is a full staffed from trauma, like actual trauma response, psychology, every kind of aspect of mental health, even down to sports performance and nutrition. Like it ranges the whole gamut, and they have emergency services. Like there are so many ways that at the academy for midshipmen to go seek help, right? And so for you as well, and on Academy Insider, we'll continue to talk about these resources just so you're aware and utilizing the correct terminology to potentially, again, recommend or encourage your son or daughter to seek those if you are noticing some of these signs that are making you, again, question if everything's okay, right? And so, again, I just want to take this time to let the audience who's listening know that there's so many incredible resources at the Naval Academy as well to help when things are starting to trend in that direction or just become extremely difficult, right? Become extremely difficult. And so, you had mentioned, Tania, that it was like this last piece of like, I wish I would have, maybe I wish I would have done something different, or I wish I would have done this. How have you forgiven yourself? And kind of what are you continuing to do in this idea of turning lessons into blessings? And how has that journey been for you? And continuing, like you mentioned, trying to share the word and spread this information so no one else has to experience this. What has this last phase of this journey been for you in doing that?
Yeah, so that for yourself, for feeling like I missed this, I think I forgave Julian first and then myself second. And forgiving myself was very hard, because we're hard on ourselves, and that's where the journaling came in. There were other
Hmm.
people I had to forgive as well, because this blew our families
Hmm.
up. Like, it's just a lot of trauma, and a lot of people were just so
Sure.
confused, and it caused a lot of trauma. So once I forgave myself, it made it so much easier for me to forgive other people, because again, it was hard to forgive myself. So once I was able to show myself grace, it made it easier to recognize the humanity in others, and trying to navigate what Julian's loss meant in their lives. And as much as I would love to say, as his mother, my pain outweighs everyone else's pain, and it really does. But I do know that others loved him immensely. Siblings, cousins, aunts, grandparents. Like, Julian was extremely loved. So when you're in pain and dealing with trauma, you don't
Mhm.
necessarily, you don't always act 100% the way you would like to act. I know I didn't. I did some things that I'm not too happy about. So yeah, forgiving myself was easy or was hard, and then forgiving others was a little bit easier. And through that forgiveness, I
Sure.
showed, it came with a lot of gratitude. So gratitude and forgiveness kind
Mm.
of went hand in hand for me.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for sharing all of these raw emotions and aspects related to the situation. If there's someone listening to this right now and they want to find you or reach out or purchase the book, where would you direct them to go in order to, again, hear more about the story or reach out to you if they're needing support as well or guidance or just want to talk?
So I do want to say, I do want to explain the name of the book.
Sure.
So you mentioned it earlier. My beautiful black son died by suicide. I
Mhm.
named it such an in your face title because when I first suffered this loss, I ran to a bereavement group that dealt specific to suicide. I did several groups, and I was always the only parent that lost their child of color.
Mhm.
And it felt very lonely for whatever reason. I, I just, and I didn't have anyone that I knew that looked like me that suffered this type of loss. I realize now that in the Black community, we do suffer loss from suicide. We just don't talk about it. So I wanted the book to be named a title where another Black parent would know, oh my God, somebody else suffered this same type of loss. But it's not just for the Black community. The book can be found right now only on Amazon. And it's not just for someone that has someone that they think is depressed. It is
Sure.
also for someone that thinks they know everything about what depression looks like. It's definitely, I try to be very, very specific on Julian's personality and how wonderful he was for
Sure.
selfish reasons. Again, trying to explain how I missed it, right? But I also do go into some very deep details on the signs that Julian did display that myself and others missed. And they are like textbook direct signs or indirect signs of what severely depressed individuals display, characteristics that they display. So if you're interested in buying the book, it is, shows Julian's picture, beautiful
Mhm.
picture, because he is beautiful. And I used to always say when I posted on social media, oh, my beautiful black son. So the name came kind of natural for me. But I
Sure.
do encourage parents that want to really dig deep, and definitely for parents at the Naval Academy, because it is so stressful, and you want to
Mhm.
find that balance of making sure your kid is okay but not being too much of a burden, but understanding when there are signs. So, for
Mhm.
anyone that is interested in purchasing the book, it can be found on Amazon right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. And is there anything that you would like to leave the Academy Insider audience with on top of what you've already mentioned?
One of the main focuses that I have, or a main focus that I have, is making sure that everyone knows we no longer say committed suicide. It's important for me to stress that because committed, you commit murder. You don't commit suicide. My son loved life. My son loved me. He would not have intentionally left me with this hole in my heart. He knew how much I loved him. Sometimes he would say, "Mom, you're obsessed with me." He knew I was obsessed with him. He would not have purposely done this to me. So when you are suffering from a mental illness,
Mhm.
your mind plays tricks on you and you can't think of anything else other than ending your pain. So it's not something you commit. We say lost by suicide or died by suicide. But I definitely would love for all of your audience to recognize that and try to change that terminology. It does make a big difference for people that are having those thoughts to
Yeah.
feel a little more like it's a safe place to not use that term. And it definitely makes the survivors of suicide loss feel a little more accepted, that you don't think our loved ones did this to us in a selfish way, because it's not about being selfish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and share this story. And again, just heal out loud and, just put this in the air for families at the Naval Academy as well, just to be considering this. So thank you so much for your courage, your strength, your kindness to do this. And we really, really appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you, Grant, for recognizing this is such an important topic. It's not a fun topic, but it is an
Mm.
important topic, and I thank you so much for recognizing that.
Of course, it's my pleasure. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And again, to the Academy Insider audience, feel free to reach out. If there's ever anything that I can do for you and help educating about the resources that exist at the Naval Academy and in the Navy and Marine Corps to help in these situations as well, please, please, please reach out. That's the goal of this, right? Is to get awareness out as well, just to have these discussions, like you mentioned. It's not fun. It is important. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to the Academy Insider audience, I hope you have a good day. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Academy Insider podcast. I really hope you liked it, enjoyed it, and learned something during this time. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe or leave a comment about the episode. We really appreciate to hear your feedback about everything and continue to make Academy Insider an amazing service that guides, serves, and supports midshipmen, future midshipmen, and their families. Thank you.